The stage is set for a discourse that will challenge your assumptions and expand the boundaries of your understanding. Ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome. This is the 7th edition of the SASI Debate Challenge, proudly brought to you by SAYWHAT and supported by the Swedish Embassy in Zimbabwe. My name is Miss Jones, and I am your debate mistress. Joining me today on stage are 4 prestigious universities. Teams, please make yourselves known, starting from podium 1 all the way to podium 4.
Hi, my name is Fuyan, and I'm from Great Zimbabwe University.
And I'm Tari, Great Zimbabwe University.
Tandogoshe from Midlands State University.
Tabiso Sibanda, Midlands State University.
Atin Mudare, NAST.
Nombulelo Ndlovu, NAST.
Tanaswa Magwaza, MSUAS.
Nathan Ndlovu, MSUAS.
Now that we are well acquainted, welcome aboard. Let the games begin. This debate will follow the British parliamentary style. The rules are, each participant will be given exactly 4 minutes to present their case. Points of information are allowed. However, if your POI has been denied, you have to wait for exactly 30 seconds before requesting for a second opportunity. With that being said, the motion reads: this House believes that human rights standards ought to be absolute and independent of cultural context. This House believes that human rights standards ought to be absolute and independent of cultural context. The motion has been stated. Prime Minister, the ball is now in your court.
Panel, first of all, in my speech, I'm going to tell you exactly what we think human rights look like and why we think they are most important, or why we think it's important for us to recognize them as independent and absolute, regardless of cultural context, right? We think when you're looking at your human rights, we're looking at an entity that is universal and that is inalienable, right? That is to say that these things are inseparable, right? Meaning they cannot be limited or restricted by cultural context. It also means to that extent that when they're a global concept, right, when they're a global idea, it's going to make it difficult for us as a global community to say we're going to track each and every single culture that exists in the community in order for us to incorporate them in the global standard of measuring human rights, because it's simply just impractical. And that's why we think that human rights need to have a standard that is concerted upon by each and every single country that is part of the international and global community based on what we think that those countries believe is right or wrong, right? First of all, we're going to talk about the principle of accountability. We think that, first of all, when we look at human rights watchdogs, right, e.g. the United Nations, right, we think that they fail to hold governments accountable for violation of human rights. When we say that the human rights in each and every single community or society or country is influenced by their cultural context, how so? We think that when you come to Uganda and you ask them why exactly they're doing what they're doing, they'll tell you that you don't have the ability to tell us what to do, you don't have the ability to govern us, right? You can't hold them accountable for violations of human rights because they subscribe to their own things, their own cultural beliefs that they believe in, right? For example, if they practice child marriages, you can't hold them accountable for violation of human rights because they believe that it's right according to their culture. And we think that's why we think we need a global and absolute standard of human rights, regardless of cultural context, right? But then we tell you about the issue of relativization, which is also related to the issue of cultural diversity. We say that the existence of diverse cultural practices and beliefs does not necessarily justify the relativization of human rights. That is to say, the fact that some cultures may condone practices that violate human rights does not make them acceptable, right? For example, we say that the fact that we recognize that in Zimbabwe, right, in recent years, women could not be able to inherit because they were seen as people perpetual minors, right? But then we think that because of the intervention of human rights standards that are absolute, right? We saw that practice as something that was wrong, regardless of the fact that it was popular and it was common within Zimbabwe, and we did away with that practice, right? We shows why we need to have like a global and an absolute standard of measuring human rights. But then we also tell you about why we think it's important to protect vulnerable groups across the globe. We think this is a key issue that needs to be engaged upon within this debate, right? We think that absolute human rights protect vulnerable groups across the globe, such as women, children, disabled people who may be oppressed within their respective culture, who suffer different problems, right? And when we say that each and every single individual has a right to education, right, we're saying that it doesn't matter what your background is, it doesn't matter where you come from, it doesn't matter whether you're black or white, it doesn't matter whatever society you come from. We think that you're still important within society. We think that the very reason why they're called human rights in the first place is because they apply to each and every single human, not just to say they are Zimbabwean rights or they are Mashingo rights or whatsoever, right? We think that is also a key classification in this debate. But then we also tell you about the concept of humanity that are inherently universal within society. We say that the only thing that differs is the diction that we use. That in Africa we call it Ubuntu or whatsoever, right? But then there's still standards of decency that exist across the globe that are similar across the entire globe. We should think that each and every single person recognizes, like the fact that you have to treat people nicely, right? Is still something that we think we value, right? And we think it's something that shows us why we need to have a global standard of human rights. Because already we tell you of the reasons why we think that the concept of human rights, right, is not something that we can say we're going to cater for each and every single society that exists across the globe, for each and every single country to adhere to your cultural values, right? Because it becomes impractical. But then we also tell you about the existence of provisions in the constitution, right? We tell you about when countries adopt constitutions and they seek to strike a balance between their cultural values and their commitment to human rights standards, right? We think it balances out the idea that these two things are independent, right? The reason why women are now able to inherit is not because it was right in our culture, but because the constitution saw it fit to not recognize women as perpetual minors. With this, we have been more proud to propose. Thank you.
And that was the Prime Minister stating his case. Leader of Opposition, please take center stage.
Panel, the biggest flaw with open government is they only exist in a world that assumes that cultural context always and has ever failed human beings, and secondly, that it only exists to perpetuate bad behavior, right? To effectively engage in the entire case. In considering cultural context, we think that we build a better room for us to effectively engage the bad aspect of the culture and find ways to protect individuals that exist within that particular context and build like better room to like effectively create human rights standards that would protect people from those bad cultural practices. But by neglecting it completely, we still leave room for all those bad practices to continue to take place at the end of the day. But what are human rights standards essentially? We think that on a principle level, they are the basis that we use to determine what a human being is entitled to do. How do we protect them from themselves, and how do we protect them from the people around them? But how do we come about these things? We don't think that these things are arbitrary. We think that they come from years of observing patterns of how people consider what is life, what is living good, and what is living in a manner that is not good. We think that they come from shared values and understanding of this is how we treat each other as human beings, essentially. And we think that all of those things are influenced by culture, because that's where that very common understanding of what the world is and how it should function comes from, essentially. But why is culture a very important aspect in then formulating these things? We think that it is at its core, it is about identity. It is about how I see myself and see you and figure out how I interact with you as an individual, right? We think that it's important for the sake of consistency. We think that the only way that human rights can be effective and effectively implemented is when a human being has that level of understanding and it is consistent with how they were socialized and what they believe to be right and what they believe to be wrong, essentially. But thirdly, why would neglecting culture be something that doesn't work at the end of the day? We think that because these people are already existing in this specific environment, because they're already socialized a certain way, neglecting that aspect of their identity would cause a certain level of inconsistency with laws that would have not considered that at all. And we think that the best way possible to engage the bad elements of this culture, we don't think that it's necessarily completely and absolutely bad, but we think that the best way to engage those like negativities that come with having that culture in existence in that particular setting would be to integrate it and consider it and doing those certain things. But why can human rights standards not be absolute, essentially. We think that this is something that's also important in this debate. We think that they can't be absolute because they come with certain freedoms that to a degree might need to be limited. For example, things such as freedom of expression, things such as freedom of speech, that if human beings are to take advantage of could in the process infringe on other human beings. And this is why we think that it's things that can't necessarily be set in stone, and things such as circumstance and context ought to continuously be considered in formulating these things. So what is the most important thing in this debate, essentially? It's to firstly prove to you how do we effectively deal with the negative aspects of this cultural context, in considering the fact that the only way that these rights could effectively protect individuals from themselves and other people is if it exists in a context where they understand and it's built on those shared values and the value systems and the belief systems and the principles that raise them, essentially. And it's not in conflict. They are not in a place where they find themselves in conflict with themselves and not really understanding how these things work and how they come about. At the end of the day, we think that the only way an individual can exist as an abiding citizen is if the law that governs them is the law that they understand and the law that they encourage to sort of uphold at the end of the day, because it's how they were raised and it's consistent with what they believe to be what the world ought to function as at the end of the day. And also to really understand that these things could never really be arbitrary.
The leader of opposition has spoken, and now we'll leave the floor open to the Deputy Prime Minister.
So, panel, what we get from side opening opposition are two main ideas. First, that the use of global standards that are absolute will cause inconsistency to culture, and it is an arbitrary approach to human rights. But then we do not get how this is going to help this motion moving forward, because at the end of the day, culture itself is not consistent because it's dynamic and forever changing. So at least if we have a static standard that we're always going to refer to, it is going to help our case. And they brought about to this podium the fact that human rights will bring about unnecessary freedoms. I don't get how this helps their case, because at the end of the day, even if we were to adopt the cultural context approach, freedoms will still be limited, because even in culture, the freedoms are limited, and the existence of my rights as a human do not necessarily threat the existence of the other person's rights, and who doesn't know anyway that all human rights are limited. For us to understand this debate, we need to put in mind that human rights are inseparable and cannot be limited by cultural context, and they are difficult to manage if we disintegrate them into smaller and specific parts, because we wouldn't be able to cater for everyone. And they're contained in international statutes and treaties, and adopting the approach of culture will only disintegrate the international community. Also, on accountability, it is difficult to monitor human rights mechanisms created in the context of culture, as it takes away the purpose and the essence of human rights to begin with. If we take the approach that Tando was suggesting, we're essentially taking back human rights into the hands that we removed. We're going back to step one to address the matter why we suggested human rights to begin with. And we already have institutional and national human rights mechanisms, bodies, statutes, constitutions, and we also have regional mechanisms. So we have not exactly taken away your culture or your identity, but what we have done is create an overall international parental board to gatekeep the handling of human rights in countries and places where culture is rich, such that human rights may be threatened. And just because some cultures condone practices that human rights practices does not mean that they are morally justifiable. For example, we have practices like child marriages. If we didn't have a standard approach to human rights, we would still be dealing with this by now. Moving on, cultural influence works against our progress in trying to empower humanity, because, for example, most African countries' constitutions are tailored in line with standard international human rights. And the influence of these standard human rights and international human rights has brought about changes like the abolition of death penalty, like the introduction of abortion rights. And if we did not have these standards, by now we'll still be fighting things like getting girls into school, we'll still be fighting military conscription of children, we'll still be fighting indigenous property rights. So there is no excuse in why we should start specifying human rights into diverse cultures, especially if culture is ever changing. We would not be able to keep up with that, and we would have essentially removed parts of the world where culture is rich from the international community, and this does not even work that way. So at the end of the day, all the points that opening opposition brought to this podium are just fallacious.
That was the Deputy Prime Minister stating her case. Now, let's hear what the Deputy Leader of Opposition has to say.
Madam Speaker, ma'am, this debate is not about whether we should globalize human rights or not. This debate is about whether we should be considering cultural context in formulating these human rights standards or not. Basically, panel, what team government think that if culture is saying let us marry off 10-year-olds to old human rights, we should also say that within our human rights. No, we are not saying that. We are actually saying let us consider that context, right? You are saying culture was saying this, right? How do we best protect our people from those harmful cultural practices within the current status quo, right? So we are saying out of whatever we have been through, right, the lived experiences of these people, right, we are saying out of that context, right, let us come up with human rights which best protect people from those harmful practices, from those harmful practices, and come up with something which will protect them and also give them freedom and give them a better world and a better society, right? So we're saying that why basically we're saying this, we should consider cultural context. Panda, what my face becomes here and tell you that everyone knows culture, right? These are our lived experiences. So we are basing our rights on common grounds, Panda, because after we've built up these rights, right, we need to also implement these human rights, right? So for people to follow something, they need to understand that, and they also need to relate to whatever you are trying to implement, right? So if got some other people who are in low density areas, we've got some other people who are not learned, panel, right? Most of these criminals are people who are not learned, people who do not know how to read, who do not understand English, right? So basically, by putting these rights under a context which everybody understands, right, it's easier for us to implement those human rights because we are on the common ground. Each and everyone understands what we're trying to say. You're taking.
Since culture is dynamic, how do you aim to keep up with change in that dynamic culture and standards of human rights? Okay, panel, what to tell you in today's motion that you have got constitutions, right? You have got human rights, and these human rights are constantly being updated, right? Panel, for example, they talked about the death penalty, right? Due to the changes in culture, right, this and that, Zimbabwe is now a Christian nation, right? Because mainly it was a Tiara nation, but now it's a Christian nation, right? Because to that we are now Christians, right? We believe each and everyone has got a right to life, right? So due to the fact that we had death penalty back then, right, we then alter our human rights to suit the current the culture which is there, panel. So we believe these human rights ought not to be absolute, to what? They ought to be absolute to culture and depend on culture, panel, on the cultural context. Going further, panel, what we tell you is that we have some other freedoms which people have due to these human rights, and they need to be limited, panel, right? So we need to consider some cultural context. For example, we believe that human rights have humans have got the right to freedom of speech. They've got the right to say whatever they have to say, right? But we believe by considering cultural context, that's when we come here and tell you that as Christians, children need to speak in a certain manner, right, to their elders, need to speak in a certain manner to people in position, right? So that's when we say yes, we've got the right to freedom, but also everyone needs their respect, right? So basically, you are now building these human rights, you are now building these human rights standards on common grounds, panel. What you get from our side of the house, right, is you are now implementing human rights on common grounds which everybody can understand, right? Which is going to make it easier for people to understand this, and it's going to make it easier for people for the ones on government to implement these rights, and also for people to follow these rights. With this, we've never been proud to oppose.
The Deputy Leader of Opposition has spoken. Now we leave the floor open for the Member of Government.
So panel, in this debate, we'd like to make some things very clear so that for the better understanding of the debate, we are able to move forward. Let me give you a context. 50 years ago, sending your girl child to school was deemed as something that was very useless. Therefore, selling your cows to send your girl child to school, you're nothing but wasting your money that you could possibly invest in a boy child, right? We scrap that, and then culture says, it's now fine to take your girl child to school. But now, 50 years later, culture still says, no, but somehow it's still not right for you to then say that same child whom you sent to school should get the same equal pay as a man. That is what we say in this problem that is problematic, right? Because when you look at a historical analysis that has existed over the years, that the things that culture determines are right, number one, they are dynamic. Number two, they suit the needs of the cultural situation that exists in that environment. We come and tell you that an issue such as slave trade and all those things that affect people in general. We come and tell you that, let me just connect this with my main argument, right? So the first thing that we think in this debate is very crucial is how the whole opposition bench doesn't really look at the influence that culture has on people. We come and tell you that when we look at the influence that religion plays, because religion is part and parcel of culture in society, we come and tell you that the influence that religion plays in society is so powerful, right? That the things that they deem is right, the things that they want to paint to the majority that is right, in most cases are things that we have to change and go back to 20 years later and correct. Why? Because every decision that we based on, every right that we think is right, we are saying it should be based on what culture determines. And this is why we're saying the moment we have a universal and absolute and independent standard that says, you know what, we are independent of what people believe is right. Because this is why we have governments that sit down to discuss. Because if we were to consider each and every cultural context that exists in Zimbabwe alone, we'll never reach a consensus. That is goes without saying. We'll never reach a consensus because cultures are different. Cultures are dynamic. So therefore, for us to have to come up with a human right to say you should send your girl child to school, that will possibly take us 50 years to get everyone to agree. Number one, that is time wasting. Number two, we come and tell you that by us trying to say that let's not standardize these things, we come and believe that we have what we call the homogenization of culture at the end of the day. We believe that by forcing each and every cultural context that exists in society to agree to one certain thing that we force down upon their throat that is right, we believe that we're taking away their right for them to decide for themselves what society or model society that we are building for them. Because we come and believe that by a virtue of saying that every cultural context that exists should agree on consensus to say this is what is right, we're taking away the elements that are crucial for that particular cultural context. At the end of the day, what we're building in a society is a culture that is almost the same. The culture that you find in Africa is the same culture that you'd find in America. Why? Because it's taking away the ability for the cultures to sit down upon themselves and discuss according to the standards that we've set, right? Because in this instance, what we're saying is we are letting the cultural context determine what should be a human right. And that is wrong. What should happen is the cultural context should follow what we set down and as governments and discuss and say these are the things that we believe need to be looked at the end of the day. What have we shown to you in this debate? We've shown to you how it is time wasting to involve. Thank you very much.
Cultures are different, cultures are dynamic. That was the member of government stating his case. And now we'll leave the floor open for the member of opposition.
Panel, I'm here to oppose the motion that goes by this House believes that the motion that goes by this House believes that human rights standards ought to be absolute and independent of cultural context. So the government has said, the opening government has come here to say that rights are they say that rights are static and are more permanent. But we also view that rights are also dynamic. That's why we see that they are updated from time to time. Constitutions are continuously updated. So you need to also to consider that fact that rights are not static. And also, I'm here now to acknowledge the opening opposition. And they have said and stated what they've stated well. And I just want to acknowledge that before I extend our view. So they have said that the culture is not entirely bad. And we also acknowledge that culture is not entirely bad. So the argument that the government has said is that some of the cultures are bad and we cannot tolerate we cannot tolerate certain cultures, but we just create an absolute right that affects someone's culture and violates their culture. But we are saying that the culture is not entirely bad, and people have the right to do what they want if they agree in a certain society. So we are saying that. So as acknowledging what the opening opposition have said, we also want to extend that we acknowledge that culture is not entirely bad and also is not entirely good, but we cannot impose rights at an expense of violating someone's culture. And we are here to make sure that we are creating these rights, and we also have to consider someone's culture because it's part of their rights. So we need to also know that when we are imposing absolute rights, are we not also violating some of these rights of these people? You take a Khoisan, they have a way, they have their orientation, they have a way of doing their things. You can't compare a Khoisan to someone who is in America. So you now need to make sure that you also consider the people's culture. So as we extend, we acknowledge that yes, the culture may not be perfect, but we are not supposed to impose rights that you are saying they are static, yet we're also seeing that they are dynamic on those people violating their culture. But you need also to consider that in what you are doing, you are not violating other rights that you have put in contradiction to what you are thinking. So we, as the closing opposition, we extend our case to you, and we are saying that we have to agree to certain rights, but we don't agree to the rights that violate the culture. We need to consider the rights of these people because they are human beings. We can't compare someone in the Atlantic and in the. So with this, thank you.
That was the member of opposition. Up next, Government Whip, please take center stage.
The member of opposition comes here and tells us that it is an expense for us to violate someone else's culture and trying to change it to rights. But we come and tell you that it is not an expense to violate someone's culture because we're basically saying that continue with your cultures, and that is why the rights that we are actually developing are not based on your culture's context. Then we come here and say that the other opposition actually told us that let us come together and develop rights that are in line with our cultures. But we tell you that that's hereditary. It's time consuming. We can't be here to actually deliberate and actually because these cultures not taken. Because these cultures are very dynamic, we can't be changing our rights every now and then. So bringing you to what we are actually talking about, we're talking about absolute. We're saying that these human rights will be unwavering, they'll be uncompromising, and with no exceptions or flexibility. We tell you that these rights can be used in any place in the world. Whether I am in China, whether I'm in Zimbabwe, whether I'm in Angola, whether I'm in Indonesia, I still have human rights. We will enlighten these rights for you that my partner had not clearly enlightened. These rights that we speak about, we're saying that the number one, the right the right for you to have education, the right to privacy and protection of personal data, the right to freedom, and the right to choose.
Point of
So,
information.
not taken. So, when we're looking at this, we're looking at, it was stated by the first government that there are issues of child marriages. We tell you that these child marriages are actually lessening the girl child from getting the right to education. We come and tell you that there are cultural practices that are being practiced, like virginity testing for women. We tell you that if a woman is tested of their virginity and the whole entire community now knows, we are telling you that it's incentivizing their right to actually privacy and protection of personal data. We talk about the right to freedom. We tell you that the right to freedom, as we stand for it, we tell you that the right to freedom, they have the right to choose what they want and what they do not want. We tell you of instances like LGBTQ+. If someone doesn't have a right to choose, we're looking at issues of religion. My partner has spoken about how religion is brought about in the society. Religion tries and covers up the blind spots and the potholes of what culture actually improvises. So we come and tell you that if these people are LGBTQ, they express themselves that, yes, this is what I want to do, not taken. This is what I actually want to do. If religion is coming inside, they'll tell you that this is not what we believe in. There is only two religions. There is the girl and the boy. But we come and tell you that in the world that we're living in other societies, we now have over 66 genders developed from two. So we declare and say that someone has the right to choose. Someone has the right to education. Someone has the right to privacy and protection, because we don't really necessarily need to be going around talking about other people's things. Secondly, we are going to talk about the time wasting that is involved in these cultures. If we're to deliberate with these cultures, we're going to waste a lot of trying to understand what is their cultures. We have the Kumalos who believe that we cannot eat aquatic life because this is related to our surnames. We have the Ndlovus who say that we are not going to eat the elephant because our surname is Ndlovu, so we're not going to do that. So trying to come down and actually say that, why are we trying to bring rights and match them with the cultures? We cannot deliberate on that, because that will be time wasting and it won't bring anything that is of validity to us. With this, we have never been so privileged to propose.
The government whip has spoken. Now let's hear it from the opposition whip.
So, panel, in the first half, we've seen the government side, and they've come and brought out some very good points where they were talking about entity and it being universal. They were also talking about the principle of accountability, relativization, protecting vulnerable groups, and the concept of humanity, right? And we've also had, in the second half, the members of government also coming to emphasize on those points. And we've also had the opposition bench, which have also brought some arguments against the motion that human rights standards ought to be absolute and independent of cultural context, right? And we are here to oppose that motion as the opposition bench because we do really feel that we are not completely dismissing human rights standards because they are good for everyone. But we are saying when we are dealing with things that affect the people, we have to consider the people, right? Let's say, for instance, in the effect of human rights in terms of marriage, this is not exactly a universal thing. For example, we can say that we are saying we want to have a human right where we are saying no child or no one under the age of 18 is supposed to be married. But then that comes with an issue of the realism of a person by themselves, where they can decide themselves if they have a right to that freedom of deciding whether they want to get married or not.
Point.
But denied because when we are talking about making human rights, the main concern is the people. And so beliefs are subjective. They depend on the way that a person sees things. So these things are things that differ from one person to the next. And so we are here to say that, yes, we accept that rights like freedom of religion and right to expression, these are rights that require careful consideration because as a whole, and as Africa, in particular, we prioritize the issue of Uno and Ubuntu. So we are people who actually take it very seriously, and we actually prioritize the issue of relationships. So there are some rights that can actually do good for some people, but then they end up destroying relationships for people. So we say that we should respect cultural diversity because cultures have unique values and traditions and social norms that are integral to their identity. So when we're taking away their culture, we are taking away their sense of identity. So what solution do we bring you as the opposition bench? We say that human rights concepts can evolve through dialogue, interaction between different cultures. Encouraging this dialogue can lead to a more inclusive and adaptable understanding of human rights where all parties are involved. Absolute standards may hinder this process by dismissing the potential contributions of various cultural perspectives to the development of human rights norms. And there's also an issue of tailoring human rights approaches to specific cultural context, which can lead to a better compliance and more meaningful change, because a one-size-fits-all can lead to a lot of resistance and ineffective implementation. At the end of the day, we want to save everyone, and we want everyone to be in a position where they feel comfortable, and that is why we say that we are not completely dismissing human rights, but we are saying they should not be absolute. And we feel that we have provided you possible solutions that could help better instead of actually making these things obsolete, because that will now result in undermining sovereignty and self-determination. And thank you.
The debate has been set and the motion has been stated. Ladies and gentlemen, now we wait for the adjudicators to give us their verdict. But before they do, Podium 1, how are you feeling?
I'm okay.
You're okay. That's great. And sir, how are you feeling?
I'm hungry and tired.
Yeah, you're not the only one. Ma'am, how are you?
We are tired, Shem.
We all are at this point, but you did so well. Well done. Manicaland State, hello, sir.
Hello, ma'am.
How are you?
I'm fine.
Ma'am, how are you?
I'm okay, how are you?
I'm great, thanks. Are you happy to be here?
Yeah.
Did you like the motion?
Yeah. Yeah, I did.
Okay. You make it very difficult for me because it just ended. I was expecting some lengthy something. But it's all right, it's okay. In the last panel that we had, we talked about 577. So I just wanted to ask, has anyone ever called 577, just out of interest?
I haven't.
Anyone? No. Okay, that's all right. Anyone who knows what 577 is and what it does?
It's the free toll line for SAYWHAT, where people who have problems can call and they can get assistance.
Okay, that's all right. That is true. Still waiting for our judges as they deliberate. Podium number 3, I'm back. Ma'am, which program are you studying?
Accounting.
Accounting, all right. And why do you like accounting?
I loved accounting because I loved to do numbers since I was in O-level. So it was maths, accounting, and then I just decided to do it. So now the reason why, because I love it, is because it solves a lot of issues to deal with money in the world.
Money, okay. So we can trust you with our money?
Yes, you can.
Okay, it's all right, it's okay. Which year are you now?
2-2, going for my attachment.
Okay, all right. Okay, that's understandable. Sir, which year are you now in?
I'm in my 5th year.
5th year, engineering. Okay, 5-1, 5-2?
5-2.
5-2. Are you done with your dissertation?
I'm actually supposed to submit it next week.
Oh, okay, is it prepared?
Yeah, we'll work on it.
You're working it. That's all right. I'm back. MSU. Ma'am, how are you?
I'm okay, how are you?
I'm well, thanks. As we wait for the judges to deliberate, please just share about the program you're studying towards and how you feel about it.
I'm doing an economics degree. I love it.
Absolutely in love with it. That's amazing. You get a few of those. People are just like, I'm going to school because, well, my mom told me to do so. So I like the fact that you're enjoying what you're doing. Sir, What are you studying towards and how do you feel about it?
I'm studying towards a degree in bioinformatics and biotechnology.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I feel like it's a good degree. It will change the world somewhere, somehow. Yeah.
How?
So bioinformatics and biotechnology deals with drug discovery, genetics, rare diseases, this and that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, and what do you hope to do with it maybe in the future?
Get some money.
Okay, I like that. Very fast and straight to the point. Get some money. No innovations, nothing. We're not expecting anything from you anytime soon.
I'm just expecting to use it as a stepping stone so that I get something of my own.
Ah, all right. I like that. I like and respect that. Hello, ma'am. I'm back.
Hi,
How are you?
I'm good.
All right. So please just tell us a little bit about what you're studying and how you feel towards it.
I'm pursuing law. What was the other question?
How do you feel about it?
Well, I mean, school is hard, so yeah, sometimes I have indifferent feelings about
it.
Yeah, but I love what I do.
I like that. Which year are you in now?
I'm in my fourth.
Oh, you're almost done. When do we
No,
graduate?
I still have a year to go. I still have the whole of next year.
Oh, is it? Interesting. I thought law was like 4, but that's a good point.
It is 4 in other universities.
Okay. But are you stressing that point so that they can change the curriculum?
No. I don't actually see the reason why it's 5 years and not 4.
4 years.
Yeah. I guess you just choose where you want to go. Because I chose where it's 5 years because I thought I was going to learn more. But it's the same
Than
thing.
the other people. Okay. And how has been the journey?
Well, I hardly ever remember when I started. Like, it went so fast.
Okay.
Yeah. If I could go back, I would.
Nice. I'm glad you're enjoying. That is it from the participants. Now our judges are ready to give us their final verdict.
Thank you guys for a very, very, very interesting debate. And from the adjudication panel, first and foremost, it would be dishonest of me to say that this call was easy. We spent a significant amount of time, given the amount of time we're given, deliberating on the call, which we eventually, on a split, ended up deciding was as following. In fourth position, we have closing opposition. In third position, we have closing government. In second position, we have opening opposition, and then in first position, we have opening government. And here's a justification why. We felt, in terms of contribution in the debate, we felt that the key ideas in this debate were very opening half heavy. We felt a lot of contentious issues came from opening government and opening opposition. We felt in terms of the characterization of what human rights are and what the rights of people look like came exceptionally well from the opening half. A lot of our contention actually came in trying to decide what context we believed more. We felt that is a corner. I'm going to get back to that. On this side of the house, we also felt, in terms of contributing to the debate, closing opposition could not outrank anyone based on having the least contribution to what's characterizing rights in terms of contributing new ideas. We felt in terms of closing government, in as much as we did appreciate their contribution to the debate, we think we could boil it down to a couple of arguments. Firstly, that it was time consuming. Secondly, that culture only benefits momentary things. And that thirdly, culture is dynamic, therefore it is time consuming. In as much as we think that those are interesting ideas, we do not think that in terms of, 1, how they were analyzed, 2, how they were framed in terms of importance to the debate, and 3, the enormosity of how much they contributed towards the outcome and our perception of human rights and what world best serves human beings in terms of social progression, in terms of a rights-based approach. We don't think it could outrank anything that came from the opening half of the debate. On the opening half of the debate, however, we felt the major contention from us as an adjudication panel was trying to adjudicate what framing of the debate we believed more. Did we believe opening government's framing that human rights had propensity of being abusive, had propensity of creating harm, had propensity of creating spaces where without a universality of human rights, we could not get any form of social progress in terms of empowering and protecting people within those societies? Or do we buy into opening opposition's framing of the debate that even in instances where human rights even in instances where the culture itself might create harm, the idea of trying to impose human rights without the consent, the buy-in, and the social engineering that culture provides within those particular contexts, and the pushback you get when you try to erase that culture, can we get that sort of progression within that particular community? We think those two contexts were very hard in terms for us to adjudicate. We wish we had a bit more time, but after a bit of deliberation, we came to the understanding as a group, we came to the voting as a group why we preferred opening government. The conversation ended up boiling to, in instances where culture is predominant and culture is left to its own devices, can we guarantee that people can be protected within those particular instances? I think from Deputy Prime Minister, we get the characterization of what the world looked like when there was no standardization. From Prime Minister, we get the characterization of what it looks like when we leave pockets of alienation, when we leave pockets of abuse within certain spaces because we are respecting cultural rights within certain contexts. It means whether you're abused within a cultural context or outside of a cultural context, your human right is still being, it's still being erased. The idea that human rights have to be universal can only occur in instances where universality is irrespective of culture. We think we bought into that argument because if we were to say that human rights are universal, I think your idea of that societies have rights in as much as human beings have rights was something that could have been analyzed a bit better and clarified a bit better to create a more significant contention within that argument that societies have rights in as much as humans have rights. And I think maybe if it had been taken a bit to that extent, the conversation might have ended up tipping to your favor. So based on that, based on your characterization of what human rights look like, based on your characterization of what the world would look like in instances where human rights were universal in nature, but were practiced differently based on different contexts and implemented at different points in time, we bought the harm principle as a mechanism for us to create an urgent need to curb instances where culture could create abuse. From opening opposition, we did value your idea that culture can be an important vehicle in terms of protecting people, but we also, at its core, ended up coming to the conclusion that even if there is a good argument and is a good idea, what happens to people that fall within the cracks while culture itself is trying to catch up to to human dignity in general? And I think that contention itself ended up separating the opening half of the debate. Closing opposition, closing government, interesting arguments, but based on how the context said, the argument said, we brought more into the opening half of the debate. It was a very good debate. Good luck on the draw. Good luck on the break. It was fun debating you guys for the past 9 rounds. Hopefully we'll adjudicate you somewhat. Thank you.
And that brings us to the end of our debate. Thank you to our judges and well done to the participants. This is the Speak and Solve initiative. My name is Miss Jones. Thank you so much for joining us. Until next time, goodbye.